How are you?
I'm very well. Life's treating me very kindly.
You're a busy man.
I am. Since lockdown, I think I've had about half an hour to myself. It's just been non-stop.
What's the secret, Marcus Cauchi? What is the secret?
What's the secret to what?
You being as busy as anything all the way through COVID.
I think people have problems that they need help with, and I'm there to help. You know, this is never about me. It's always about them. And I think the model that I have in my business is that there's training and coaching, but I offer all of my clients reasonable use, unlimited coaching. So if they need help, they can get in touch. And so not one of my clients has taken a backward step, which I'm exceptionally pleased for them, because whilst other people, their pipeline dried up, fell off the cliff, deals have stalled. There was a hiccup for a week or two, but I've got clients who are doing 150, 200, 220% of target at the moment, and it's just blissful. So, the mistake people make is during tough times, they think that it's created problems for them, and it hasn't. All it did was expose the weaknesses that were already inherent there. And if you had a weak pipeline with non-prospects, then it fell off the cliff. If you weren't dealing with real opportunities, then deals stalled or got canned. And if you've done your job right, then you'll have a full pipeline, which is 3 to 5 times bigger than you need to, going from the qualified to closable stage. You'll have a clear understanding of who your ideal customer is, so that you're not spending your time trying to fit square pegs into triangular holes. And you're focusing on the customer. So you don't have to be selfish. So I was just literally came off a call with a client of mine, and he was being beaten up by procurement. But because we'd prepared him for the conversation, and procurement was asking him questions like, when is your financial year end? And trying to find out when the quarters were for him, because he thought that he was going to get a discount and squeeze him. So my client said, well, look, to be honest, our financial year end is December. And look, I can take as long as you like. I'm in no rush. We're turning people away at the moment. So why don't we push this out to the 3rd or 4th quarter? All of a sudden, procurement then buckles and says, well, no, we can't do that. Because my client already knows that they have a 1st of January deadline to deliver against, and they're already 3 months behind. So any delay, that means procurement is now in trouble, and they're firmly in the crosshairs of the line of business. And this is a project that's being sponsored by the board. So saving 10 grand here or there is of no consequence to them. And this is a bank. They don't care about 10 grand. But procurement gets paid a bonus for squeezing you for every penny. So long answer to a very short question, sorry.
It's a good one. It's a good one because your adrenaline is there and high energy, and I hear it, and thank you for that. Marcus, usually I ask who you are and for you to introduce yourself, and I love your Christian name and your surname. So I was very deliberate in saying it was Marcus Cauchi. And
thank you for getting it right. You're the 3rd person in my entire life.
I like to try, and I remember you saying that the origination of your surname was Maltese. So the origins of your families are Malta. Am I right?
They are, but it goes back way further than that, because the Cauchi were a tribe that the Romans kicked about. So we're an old, very old name. So this is a couple of thousand years old, and the Romans gave us a good drubbing. So we were, I think, a Gallic or Etruscan type, and we didn't do very well. In fact, there's a very famous French mathematician called Cauchy, same spelling. So I think we were Gauls originally, and so yeah, ancient tribe.
So I would say that we are really not competitors, but I mean, being a Celt, well, we have been fighting off so many people ourselves here in Wales.
Well, Malta's been invaded by everybody.
Yeah,
So we had
yeah.
the Knights of St. John after they got kicked out of Rhodes. Then we had the Turks, then the French, then the British. I mean, you know, the Crusades, there was a long-standing battle. So I remember my dad telling me the history of it.
Yes.
So the Crusaders were being crucified by the Moors or the Ottomans, and the Knights of St. John were beheading the Ottomans and firing their heads out of cannon. So we got a long history of bloody violence.
Yes.
And used to being invaded. And I think what you need to understand about the Maltese is we're very savvy. So when Napoleon invaded, the Maltese painted the silver gates in the cathedral in Valletta and painted them black because they were solid silver. And they knew that he was going to rip stuff off and take it home. So he thought it was just wrought iron. So that was one win to us.
Excellent. And yes, you and I giggle at the similar things, I think. Things we've inherited and things we've heard. And I think it's fascinating. And thank you for explaining that a little bit. We could do a broadcast just on that history. But moving on, where are you actually living, Marcus? Where do you live?
I live 36 miles west of London in a place called Sandhurst, which is very famous for the military academy.
Yes, and that makes me smile, as you can see. Yeah.
Well, your son's in the military, isn't he? So
he is indeed, and he is currently in Wiltshire. So
right.
Yes, and he currently is a battalion sergeant major. So the BSM is quite an acronym that I try to remember as to what it means. But he's a hard taskmaster, a bit like you, Marcus.
I'm a walkover.
Not at all. He actually made me Google up everything about what a BSM stood for and what, you know, where they came from in the army. And I was doing that on LinkedIn. I was actually doing my lessons on LinkedIn, and I had the help from the British Army, thankfully, who stepped in and said, well, do you know? And they were doing a Marcus. Did you know the history was? Did you know that? And it was really a nice session through LinkedIn. So now that we know that you're from Sandhurst, how do people get in touch with you when they are really, and who is really your cream client?
Okay, thank you. LinkedIn is probably the best thing. I'm all over it like a rash every day. My wife thinks I'm a LinkedIn addict, but it generates hundreds of thousands of pounds a year in business. So that's why I'm addicted. And also it's where I get a lot of my education because there are some great minds on there. And you can email me at mcauchi@sandler.com or off our website, southeast.sandler.com. Now, my ideal customer is someone who is running a disruptive technology company. They're somewhere between 10 and 50 million turnover, and they're looking to grow at pace. So they're looking to grow minimum of 40% per annum, but preferably closer to 200, 300, 400%. But they want to grow without the wheels coming off. And they also want to build a sustainable long-term business, because one of the traps that a lot of people fall into in technology, because they're under pressure from their private equity or venture capitalist, is to grow at any cost. And that generally creates very bad businesses. And if you look at the death rate of private equity-backed businesses, out of 30 or 40, they might get 4 or 5 that survive, and the rest end up destroyed because of the relentless pursuit for growth without thinking about building a long-term business. And so what I'm looking for are the ambitious ones, but they want to keep control. They want to grow organically, and they don't want to end up giving away pretty much all of their ownership to private equity, because that's a very dangerous trap. And in fact, I interviewed a really interesting chap, Callum Lang, today on the dangers of the private equity and venture capital trap. And it's horrific. I read an article only this morning of a chief technical officer who had options within the business. They did a trade sale for 100 million. He had 1%, but because he didn't understand the structure, he got nothing. So he spent 4 years bleeding, sweating blood to get the company to that point. And he hasn't been rewarded for it. All he's done is burn through a couple of marriages and alienated his kids and ended up with nothing to show for it. That's tough.
That is tough. So two points there from a little bit earlier and this current one in terms of hard, tough lessons. One was focus, and now you're talking about business growth. So do you focus yourself on business growth?
Partly. What I focus on is the stuff that you can control. And so a good, solid business will be simple, understand who their ideal customer is, and be absolutely relentless in the pursuit of serving them and helping them solve their problems. Be ideally debt-free and cash flow positive. Now, if you do that, if you've got a business that's like that, then you need to focus on having a plan. So you need to know where you're headed. And the problem is that most people's idea of a plan is a bunch of numbers on a spreadsheet. That is not a plan. You need to design the business you intend to become in a year, 3 years, 5 years down the road. You need to design the roles that you're likely to need at the 1, 3, 5 year mark and everywhere in between. You need to have allocated budget for them so that you can recruit. You need to know what the trigger points are. And a lot of this hard work isn't done by businesses. So they grow really rapidly and then they fall off the cliff. And that's down to lack of clarity, ambiguity, poor leadership, poor management, because a lot of first-time or second-time entrepreneurs don't really know what they don't know. Once you've designed the roles, then you need to look at the people that you've got and see, can they fit? And if they can't at the moment, is it a training need? Do they need to be moved somewhere else, or do you need to replace them and recruit somebody else into those roles? Then what are the processes that underpin the growth of your business, and how are you going to measure them? So what are you measuring? And most people measure the wrong things. They measure lag indicators, which are things that have already happened and you can do nothing about. Things like revenue, first meetings, number of proposals, number of demos. That stuff doesn't really matter. It's interesting, but it's retrospective. What does matter is the volume of quality conversations that you have that are effective. The number of first meetings moving to second meeting is a much better metric than first meetings. Did you know that 7 out of 8 first meetings don't result in a second meeting? That's a crashing waste of money and time and resource. Because if 7 out of 8 to 88% of your marketing and lead generation activity is wasted, you may as well be buying lottery tickets or premium bonds. You'll get a better return. So focusing on the right end of the problem is really what I do. And I stop people from doing stupid things. Excellent.
I hear you. From the point of view of leadership and recruitment, for me on LinkedIn, I follow Simon Sinek in terms of his podcast and his daily advice to companies, and I equally see you in that role. So in your respect, when you talk about leadership, that's from top down, I would have thought, bottom up, top down, because that was
yeah. I think leaders have a job which is not to lead, but to create more leaders.
Yep.
And their job is to, the chief executive is the chief storyteller. They need to be the person who has the narrative, which means that they need to speak to customers. Yeah. Very few chief executives and MDs spend a large proportion of their time, 30, 40% of their time, talking to customers. They need to tell the story of the customer and be the champion of the customer. Yeah. Because if they're not, and they're not relentlessly customer centric, then they'll easily be displaced. And it's more about, in this market, It's way more important to focus on keeping customers than winning new ones.
Yeah.
But so many are failing. And what they're doing is they are cutting back on the things that matter the most. What I'm seeing people cut back on, and it is a massive strategic mistake, they're cutting back on marketing. They're cutting back on sales. They're cutting back on recruitment. They're cutting back on training. They're cutting back on coaching. These 5 things are the things you need to be doubling down on.
Yes.
This is what will separate you from the rest, because everyone else, I can't remember who it was. It was someone was talking about a Formula One race, and the guy who was in second position, the guy who was in pole position spun off the track, and the guy who was in second position then went on to win. And he was being interviewed afterwards. And the reporter asked him, well, did you slow down? He said, no, I increased my speed. I accelerated. And said, well, why was that? Because I knew everyone else would slow down. And in this market, you need to really focus your attention on the things that will help you to accelerate and get closer to your customer. And spend time talking to your raving fans, but also the people who fired you, who don't love you, who hate you, and find out why. Look at what people have stopped doing. These are the kind of things that you guys, really need to pay attention to. If you talk to the people in the middle, they don't really know how to articulate the story. They don't really know why they buy. But the raving fans do, and the people who loathe and despise you do as well. But it takes real courage to go out and ask for that criticism. And that's what's missing at the moment in most companies. But the ones who do, I'm seeing them grow exponentially. Yeah. I see companies growing by hundreds of % when they're doing that.
So it's customer focus the whole time, leadership the whole time, acceleration the whole time at the moment, particularly so. And why is it that you do what you do, Marcus?
Because it's fun.
It's fun.
It's enormous fun. And nothing gives me more satisfaction than my clients achieving their capability, their potential. This morning, I was on a coaching call to a client of mine. He's 9 weeks into his new job, and he's already the 3rd highest performing salesperson in the entire company globally.
Wow.
Now, to me, that's a thrill. He's managed to turn around 2 regions in 9 weeks. And yes, he inherited some accounts, but both of those regions had plummeted to 30% of their previous performance level, and he's now got them back up to their previous level and growing. I have another client who came to me in September 2018, and she'd lost her business because of a hostile takeover. She took 3 months to recover, and we patched her back together. In the January of 2019, she did £3,000. In February, she did £30,000. In March, she did £500,000. Now, for me, that's an enormous thrill to have even played a part. She did all the work, but helping her get to that place and then prepping her and rehearsing her relentlessly. Because, bear in mind, we had to deal with all the baggage from her previous failure and the nervousness, because she'd never done a £500,000 deal before. And she closed 2 big corporates, and she was dealing with one-man bands up until this point. Now, that to me is a thrill. Her business is going through the roof. In 5 years, she'll do 100 million. Now, playing my part in that, how could you not get excited? I was up at 4 o'clock this morning. It's a Monday. I was up at 4 and I had to force myself to stay in bed for another hour and a half. Monday cannot come round quick enough.
Beaming here at the sound of a lady doing so well.
Oh, she's brilliant.
Yes.
Awesome.
And so I would add to another question, particularly within the female world, because we've had to really work at being who we are. Not that men don't have to work down hard at being who they are, but in the business world, yeah, it's been tough to be heard and to be successful in the way you've just described it. So do you see the changes in terms of who is doing well currently?
I don't understand what you mean by the changes.
The changes in terms of, well, I do because I'm female. when I joined the Chamber of Commerce, I think there were about 4 or 5 people in terms of 5 women among so many men. In terms of the
So you mean about diversity and having more women in business?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, I'm the father of 3 daughters.
Yeah.
In fact, any of you who are listening need to read a book called Brotopia by a lady called Emily Chang. And it's all about the misogyny and the discrimination that goes on in Silicon Valley. Now, there are shining examples of brilliance. So MBH Holdings is a publicly listed company that essentially invests in well-established, well-run, boring businesses like construction businesses, caravans, anything like that. And 30% of their board is made up of women, and they're looking to expand that. Okay. Women constitute over 50% of the global population. It is an act of cretinism. It's moronic not to involve more women, because women also have a tendency not to be seduced by the growth and the greed. What they tend to do is make decisions that are more focused on providing a sustainable long-term business and looking after their customers, looking after their people. When you look at the majority of businesses that are funded by private equity and venture capital, women, people of color, really struggle to get funding. Now, this again is an act of idiocy because if you are only investing in people like yourself, you have a very blinkered view of the world. If you're only recruiting people like yourself, you have a limited perspective. And there is a wonderful book by a guy called David Epstein called Range, which is all about how generalists thrive in areas where areas of specialization where creativity is required. There's a book called Rebel Ideas by Matthew Syed, which is all about how diverse groups of people see a much bigger picture of the truth rather than just a limited version of it. And when you combine diversity with a broad range of experience and you're inclusive, and again, I'll cite another fabulous example. One of my podcast guests is a gentleman called Ian Doltz. Ian was responsible for turning around pretty much every one of ICI's failing plants and taking the worst and making them the best through a process of inclusivity and diversity. And by talking to the people who are actually there on the front line, speaking to the workforce, not speaking to the managers to begin with, but actually getting the truth of what it's like to be on the coalface. And the net result of that was, over a 22-year period with ICI, he never had a single project fail. Every one of the organizations that he got involved with managed to achieve and overachieve against their KPIs in a very short space of time, turn things around, create a massively engaged, diverse, inclusive workforce. If you're not thinking like that, then you are limiting your potential, and you do your customers, your staff, your investors, and yourself a massive disservice.
I hear you loud and clear there, and keeping up with the times, which are very necessary at the moment.
Well, most people don't, Carolyn. This is the problem. Most people the majority are reverting back because under pressure, they do what they learned first. The good ones, the ones that are streaming ahead, absolutely, they're adapting in this way. But the majority, they're not. And if you are retrenching, you are essentially you're making a sacrifice, which is going from higher to lower value. That is not risking. The definition of risking is going from lower to higher value with the possibility that you will lose some or all of what you've got. But very few people are doing that.
With regards to failing, because obviously most of us, we've been in the business for a length of time and become, I would say, hardy people. What would you say about failing? I mean, the word failure has been a tough one in my generation. If you failed, everybody knew about it and you felt really bad about it. But today we don't feel quite so bad about failing because we know we're going to learn lessons, but they can be costly lessons.
Well, let me tackle this from several perspectives because it's important to understand it. The first thing is failure is almost never fatal in business, and success is almost never permanent. Failure is part of the human condition. It's natural, it's universal, and unavoidable forever. When people talk about failure, they often equate it to a personality defect. It isn't. It is simply failure in role. It's not failure in terms of your identity, who you are. However, what happens very often is people allow poor role performance to bleed into their identity. And so then they start running this narrative in their head, which says, you're an idiot, you screwed up, you're a failure, you're such a disappointment, everyone's going to be judging you. Yeah. Now, the net result of that is that if that's what's going through your head, you will find a way to make it true. Now, every failure is an opportunity to learn. And there are some fabulous technologies out there at the moment, which are, excuse me, amazing. What they do is they allow people to learn from them. And so these are technologies like Refract and Gong and Chorus. What they do is they record your calls, they break them down into talk balance between you and your prospect, the verbs that you used, the type of language that you use, the verbs, the adjectives, the number of questions that you asked, all this kind of stuff. So it offers you an opportunity to learn. Now, the problem again is that so few people learn well from their mistakes because they allow themselves to hang on to this baggage. And net result of that is that they spend their time judging themselves. They question whether they're any good at what they do. They spend their time giving themselves crap, basically. And there's no need for it. And the problem with that is that if you are afraid of failure, you won't take risks. And a life without risk is a life without any growth. And this is the problem. So if you are not taking risk, then what you'll end up doing is creating the conditions for you to actually fail worse. It's crazy.
Yes, I hear that. Finishing on a note that I feel important in terms of customer excellence, because I did win an award with 2 other trainers for customer care, and I was very proud of it at the time. And you had to not only write it, and produce it, but you had to apply it with a company. And I had great fun, like you, Marcus, doing it. So in your respect, I hear your constant thread of the customer is the important person. Can you just finish it all on expanding on that?
Yeah, you need to think as the customer, not about the customer. You need to be able to get under their skin, see the world through their eyes, understand what it's like to be them. And what I see people do is they see the customer as an organic ATM machine that provides them with cash. That's not the reason that they're in business. They're in business for their reasons, not your reasons. And you need to listen. I've never listened my way out of a sale. I've talked my way out of a fair number, but you need to listen and question your way through the sale. You need to deliver insight with your questions to help your customer or your prospect understand their situation through a different lens, because they can't solve the problem by attacking it from the same position that created it. They need to be ready to look at things differently. And selling is about helping people solve their problems, get ahead of their problems. And I look at sales as a partnership between the customer and the supplier. Now, partners help each other get better. So one aspect that is woeful in most organizations is the accountability between the two and holding each other to account. Right at the outset of working with clients, I make it clear that we're going to hold each other to account. I want to know that we will meet on a regular basis and they will tell me what matters to them and I will tell them what matters to me so that we can help improve one another, and make the output better for them. Because if I help enough of them get their needs met, I get my needs met too. And again, this goes to the next level as well. What we forget is that most products are actually sold through third parties. They're sold through partners. And so we need to be really clear about who our channel partners are, whether they're alliances, franchisees, agents, distribution. If we don't understand why our partners are in business and we don't help them be successful, then our end customer will not be happy either. And I think what's missing in many cases is the willingness to put the time in up front. In terms of the planning, what's missing also is vulnerability. People's willingness to be vulnerable and hear criticism and get feedback. And most importantly, when you've taken that feedback, be grateful for it, but then tell people how you've applied it. You know, the number of times you go to a hotel and they ask you about the shower cap, the check-in, the check-out. And what you really care about is soundproofing, because your room was right on the corner, next to the lift, next to the ice machine, overlooking the pool, and there was a stag do. And you didn't get any sleep. And no one bothers to ask you the questions that you want to know. So when you start a relationship with a customer, find out what matters to them and how they will measure your contribution. And then put yourself in line for a damn good beating every now and again, and honest feedback, so that they can tell you what's working and what isn't, so that each time you meet, you can improve.
Yes. I can hear what gets you fired in the morning, because you said, 4 o'clock, I was ready to rock and roll. And is it important, therefore, to have good sleep, Marcus?
Absolutely. It doesn't mean that I don't sleep well, but I've certainly over the years begun to value sleep a lot more. So I'll typically get 6 to 7 hours now. So I'm going to bed a lot earlier. I used to go to bed at 1 or 2 o'clock, be up at 4. 3 hours sleep. Look at me. I'm the byproduct of 25 years of bad sleep patterns. So the reality is sleep is very helpful, and there's a good reason for it, because that's when the brain juggles and filters stuff, clears out the crap, and helps you make sense of the world. It also allows you to repair and fix stuff. But more importantly, a lot of your heavy lifting can be done whilst you're asleep. So one great bit of advice that I would give everybody is go to bed with a really difficult question, and don't try and answer it. Just go to sleep having asked it of yourself, and then make sure you have a notepad and pen or your phone next to your bed so that you can take a note of any great ideas that inspire you during the night. And when you wake up in the morning, often you'll have answers to those difficult questions. Let your unconscious mind do the heavy lifting.
Yes, that's fun. I do, and it works even from losing things like keys and glasses. I tend to do exactly that exercise. I go to bed thinking, okay, let it go. And yes, it works. You wake up the following day, and if you've thought it through, then you remember where you left them, and it does work. So if it works,
there is a simpler way, which is always put your keys in the same place and always put your glasses back in the same place. Because my wife has this perennial thing, daily thing about 15 times a day. Where's my phone? Where are my glasses? And often they're on her head. So anyway, moving on.
I would add to that, though, because in my defense, as I would say, if you're moving places of work and you're constantly sort of changing premises and, that kind of thing, yes, it happens. So I'm just making, it does happen. Marcus, thank you so much. I know you're a busy man, and I'm going to let you go. And thank you for giving 150%, as I knew you would, and you did. You delivered. Wishing you well, and have a good week.
Thanks for having me.
Bye-bye.
Take care.